Our mission today: cut through the noise on a topic that, well, it directly impacts millions of Americans, but it's often overlooked. We're talking about manufactured housing. We've got some really interesting material here from the Manufactured Housing Association for Regulatory Reform, that's MHHAR. Specifically, we're looking at parts of their article, Trump 2.0, the industry's second chance, and some other key documents too. So we're going to unpack what's been holding this industry back, its surprising potential, actually, and what's being done or proposed to unleash it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how an industry that seems kind of niche on the surface actually tells us so much about these broader economic challenges, regulatory hurdles. Our goal here is really to synthesize what MHA is saying, show you not just what their arguments are, but maybe why they matter for the bigger picture of affordable housing in the U.S.
Okay, let's get into it then. When we talk about the housing crisis in America, you usually hear about, soaring prices for traditional homes, tight markets. But our sources today, they keep pointing to this other vital piece of the puzzle: manufactured housing. And MHR, well, they see themselves as the premier source for affordable home ownership, specifically non-subsidized home ownership.
That's their framing, absolutely. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the sources highlight this chronic national housing crisis. We're talking a shortage of potentially as many as 7 million affordable units. And yet, despite this huge need, the manufactured housing industry, well, it hasn't really been able to step up fully, which leads to the obvious question, right? Why not?
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting. MAR is very specific. They pinpoint these regulatory bottlenecks, that's the term they use, and they argue these have just consistently held back the industry's growth.
Exactly. The source material lays out 4 major ones. And these aren't like minor inconveniences. They're presented as really deeply rooted, long-standing discriminatory issues.
Okay, so the first one they mention is discriminatory zoning. Basically, local rules that either ban manufactured homes outright or, push them into less desirable spots. And tied to that is what MHR describes as a discriminatory lack of federal support for competitive consumer lending under something called the duty to serve, or DTS.
Right, the DTS mandate.
Yeah.
It applies to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, supposed to help underserved markets. But MH's point is that manufactured housing hasn't really gotten its fair share of that support, which makes financing harder for buyers compared to, say, site-built homes. It puts them at a disadvantage.
So that lack of support under DTS is one thing, and then the second bottleneck seems closely related.
Precisely. It's the insufficient federal support for manufactured home consumer lending under DTS. So even the support that is theoretically available, MHR argues the industry can't fully access or utilize it effectively. That's a big barrier for potential buyers needing loans.
Okay, and then the sources point to what they call excessive and baseless energy conservation regulation. This comes from both HUD and the Department of Energy.
Yes, HUD and DOE. The argument from MHAR is that these energy rules are either too strict for the type of housing, adding unnecessary costs, or maybe based on flawed ideas about how these homes use energy. It sounds like they see it as a significant burden, especially for affordability.
It definitely raises questions about, regulatory overreach versus what's practical on the ground.
It does. And the final issue MHAR brings up, maybe the most fundamental one, is the actual definition of a manufactured home in law. Specifically, this phrase, permanent chassis, that's in the original 1974 Act.
Permanent chassis, okay. That sounds technical, but you're saying it's a big deal.
According to MRA, it's been a core issue for, over 4 decades. It shapes how everything else works or doesn't work.
All right, so with all these hurdles MAR identifies, zoning, DTS lending issues, energy regs, this chassis definition,
Right.
What has it meant for the industry's actual performance? The numbers we have are quite telling, aren't they?
They really are.
Yeah.
If you look back, say, 1996 to 2005, the industry was averaging about 245,566 homes produced per year. Now, compare that to the more recent 10-year period, 2015 to 2024, the average annual production, just 94,128 homes.
Wow, that's a 62% drop.
A 62% decline, yeah.
Huge.
Especially when housing need has only gone up. That's over 150,000 fewer affordable homes per year compared to, the earlier period. And the recent numbers don't show a big rebound, do they? We saw a peak at 112,882 homes in 2022.
Right. Then it dipped in 2023 to about 103,314. And the latest reported stats, May 2025, put the annualized rate around 89,169. So it seems production kind of plateaued or even declined further into 2025.
So they're clearly struggling to scale up despite what seems like obvious demand. The numbers really highlight how far the output is from, well, not just historical levels, but the current need.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, or maybe frustrating depending on your perspective, is that the sources really argue this isn't about lack of demand from buyers. They squarely blame this regulatory environment we've been discussing. Okay, so let's circle back to that permanent chassis issue. You said it was maybe the most foundational problem. Our sources really emphasize this isn't just like legal jargon.
No, definitely not, according to MHR. It's this definition stuck in that 1974 law that they see as the root cause of so many problems.
How so? How does that one phrase have such a big impact?
Well, the argument goes like this. Because the legal definition still includes permanent chassis, which kind of harks back to the old mobile home idea built on a frame for transport, these homes can end up being treated differently than site-built houses. So maybe they don't qualify easily for standard mortgages. They face tougher zoning, like we mentioned. They might get excluded from certain federal housing programs. MH argues this definition fundamentally prevents these homes from being seen and treated as, equivalent housing stock. It limits their real-world market impact, as they put it.
And you mentioned this isn't a new fight. People have tried to change this before.
That's right. The sources bring up, for example, the Heiler Amendment. This was part of the housing bill back in 1990. It actually had support from the Manufactured Housing Institute, MHI, which is another industry group, but ultimately it failed in the Senate. So, yeah, it just goes to show how hard it can be to change these established regulations, even when there's some industry push.
Okay, so that brings us to the present and the future outlook. MHR, in the article we mentioned, talks about the prospect of a second Trump administration. How do they frame that?
They see it, and they state this quite directly, as a remarkable second chance for the industry, a chance to really change course and push for significant expansion. They believe that administration's stated policy vision focusing on deregulation, market solutions, aligns very well with what MHR wants to achieve.
That's a pretty clear strategic viewpoint. And the sources mention a specific meeting, March 25th, 2025, with HUD Secretary Scott Turner.
Yes, they detail that meeting. MHR apparently went in and strongly emphasized the urgency of the affordable housing crisis.
Yeah.
And their core message was, you have to include manufactured housing as a major part of the solution. It can't be sidelined.
So what are they actually proposing? What specific changes do they want to see happen to, unlock this potential they talk about?
Well, the absolute top priority, the thing they keep coming back to, is getting rid of that permanent chassis requirement. They want it gone from regulations and from the underlying law, the statute itself. For them, this isn't just tweaking a word. It's about fundamentally changing how these homes are classified, which they believe would unlock financing, better zoning treatment, everything.
And beyond the chassis issue, are there other key proposals?
Yes. They're also pushing for what they call the full utilization of HUD code homes, basically, making sure existing programs fully incorporate them. They want to see DTS expanded significantly for manufactured housing loans, and they want stronger federal preemption.
Federal preemption. Remind us what that means in this context.
Right. So the idea is that the federal standards for building manufactured homes, the HUD code, should automatically override any stricter or, importantly, exclusionary local zoning or building rules. Basically, stop local governments from using their own rules to keep manufactured homes out.
Okay. And if these things happen, chassis definition changed, DTS expanded, preemption strengthened, what did they predict?
MHR is pretty bullish in the sources. They state that these changes could, and I'm quoting here, catapult production to levels that would mean hundreds of thousands of additional homes per year. They also believe it would allow millions more potential buyers to actually enter the market for these homes, a huge potential impact.
So let's bring this back to you, the listener. What's the main takeaway from this deep dive? I mean, it's interesting industry stuff, but why should you care?
Well, I think it's about seeing how these sometimes dry-sounding regulations, even technical details like a definition in the law, can have massive real-world consequences. Consequences for housing affordability, for economic opportunity, for millions of actual people looking for a place to live.
Yeah, it really connects the dots between policy and everyday life.
Exactly. And if you put it in a broader context, this whole discussion really highlights that constant dance between government policy, industry interests, and, our daily lives. MHR's narrative, as presented in the sources, really underscores the need for critical thinking when you hear about complex problems like housing shortages and proposed solutions. They make it very clear their view is that future success depends on tackling these big primary bottlenecks, not just making small tweaks around the edges.
It's definitely a reminder, isn't it, that sometimes the biggest solutions aren't about adding more programs, but maybe about removing barriers that are already there. So as we wrap up here, it's pretty clear the manufactured housing industry is at this interesting point. Big challenges, yes, but also potentially huge opportunities. And the path forward, at least according to the sources we've looked at today, seems to lie squarely in tackling those core regulatory bottlenecks we've discussed.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you to mull over. If one seemingly technical detail, like that permanent chassis definition, can arguably have such a profound impact on an entire industry and potentially millions of homeowners, what other sort of hidden regulatory frameworks or definitions might be out there, maybe stifling innovation or holding back solutions in other areas you care about? It really makes you think about how the details, the fine print, can genuinely shape our world.